At a retirement home in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, a billionaire CEO walked in, not expecting much more than a quick visit to his aging father. His name was Henry Collins, a man whose success in business had earned him everything he thought he ever wanted: wealth, power, and a reputation. But today, as he entered the familiar lobby, something shifted in the air. A young voice broke the silence. "Hey sir, here to see your grandpa too?" Henry turned, surprised to see a little boy standing there, a bag of pretzels in one hand, a juice box in the other. The boy's wild hair and bright eyes sparked something in Henry, a sudden moment of clarity, or maybe it was curiosity. "No, just my dad," Henry replied with a half-smile. The boy tilted his head, then grinned. "You should meet my grandpa. He's in room 407. A chill ran down Henry's spine as the boy's words sank in. Room 407. That was the same room as his father's. For a brief moment, the world seemed to freeze around him. He had always been the distant son, keeping a safe emotional distance from the man who'd raised him. But now, as he stared at this little boy, someone so full of life, yet connected to his father in a way Henry had never seen, it was as if the walls around him were starting to crumble. What had he missed? As he walked toward the hallway, Henry couldn't shake the thought. What had his father been hiding all these years? And what was waiting for him behind room 407? In this video from Acts of Kindness Stories, we uncover a powerful tale about family, secrets, and the unexpected turns that life takes. Join us as we follow Henry's journey, one that leads him to uncover truths he never imagined and ultimately helps him heal in ways he never expected. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and overcooked carrots when Henry Collins walked into the retirement home. He had never been comfortable in this place. Too warm, too stiff, too full of reminders of a past he wanted to forget. His father's room, the place that once held the weight of their strained relationship, felt miles away from the polished conference rooms he spent most of his days in. As the CEO of a successful tech company, Henry was used to controlling every aspect of his life. But this visit, forced by a reminder from his assistant about his father's upcoming birthday, felt like something he couldn't control. It had been nearly a year since he last saw his father, and that visit was hardly anything more than an awkward exchange of pleasantries. His father, Walter, had always been a stern, distant figure, the type who never smiled, never showed warmth. The kind of man who made Henry feel like he was always fighting to earn his approval, even when there was nothing to gain from it. But today, as he stepped into the warm lobby, something felt different. Maybe it was the dull ache in his chest or the mounting pressure of his corporate responsibilities, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. As he pulled out his phone, trying to distract himself from the growing sense of dread, a small voice piped up beside him. "Hey sir, you here to see your grandpa too?" Henry looked down, startled. A little boy, no older than 6, stood by the vending machine, holding a bag of pretzels and a juice box. His shirt was half untucked, his hair a wild mess, and his eyes were wide with curiosity. They locked onto Henry's face like he was a treasure chest full of untold stories, ready to open up. Henry chuckled lightly, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. "No, just my dad." The boy tilted his head, as if weighing the seriousness of Henry's words. Then he grinned. "Mine's not here. Just my grandpa. He's in room 407. Henry froze. His mind whirred. Room 407. Walter's room. The same number his father had always been in, the number Henry had memorized, though not with any sentimental value. He quickly forced his mouth open but couldn't find the words. The boy's casual announcement shook him. Was this just a coincidence? Could the boy have gotten it wrong? Or worse, what if it wasn't a mistake? "Are you sure?" Henry asked, trying to sound casual, though his stomach churned. "Yep." The boy nodded confidently. 407. "I remember because it's the same as my locker number, just flipped." Without another word, the boy scampered off toward the residential wing, his sneakers squeaking on the linoleum. Henry, unable to quell his curiosity, followed at a slow pace. He couldn't help but notice the weight of the boy's words, gnawing at him. Why was his father's room number so casually known by a child he'd never met? His mind raced as he turned the corner, his steps heavier with every second. That's when he saw it. The boy opened the door to room 407 without knocking and went inside. Henry's heart skipped a beat and his breath caught. He watched from just around the corner, hidden from view but close enough to see everything unfold. A woman in her 30s appeared, holding the boy on her hip, and laughing at something he had just said. She was dressed casually, in jeans and a loose sweater, but there was something about her that made Henry's chest tighten. She looked at ease, comfortable in the space that Henry had always associated with coldness. Then he saw Walter. His father, Walter Collins, dressed in a cardigan Henry had never seen before, sat upright in a recliner, smiling, actually smiling. Henry stood frozen in place. He could feel the weight of his own heartbeat, pulsing through his veins. The man who had never shown affection, never softened, was smiling in a way that made Henry question everything he knew about his father. Walter stood and reached out to hug the woman, pulling her close as if she was someone he had always cherished. Then he turned and ran his hand through the boy's hair, his expression warm, almost tender. Henry couldn't breathe. The father who had always pushed him away, who had never shown any kind of softness, was now holding someone else in the way Henry had always wished for. He felt like an outsider in his own family. The woman said something quietly to Walter, something Henry couldn't quite hear, but it was the way she said it, affectionately, familiarly, that took him by surprise. She called him Dad. His father had a daughter. And not just a daughter. He had been involved in her life, raising her, loving her. Walter had never mentioned this before. Henry had always been the oldest, the one who was supposed to carry the family name. But now, standing there in the shadows, Henry realized just how much of his father's life he had never known. His hands trembled slightly, and he took a step back, not wanting to be seen, but his mind was reeling. The secret had been there, hiding in plain sight for years. And now, Henry had just stumbled upon it. How long had this been going on? How long had his father kept this woman and child in the shadows? He stood there, paralyzed, for what felt like an eternity. A resident of the retirement home shuffled past him with a walker, but Henry didn't notice. His mind was already racing, piecing together fragments of a story he had never been told, a story he wasn't ready to hear. After what seemed like forever, he turned and walked out. He didn't knock on the door. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't even try to process it. Instead, he walked straight out of the building, his footsteps loud in the empty hallway. Outside, the cool wind hit him, the gusts sharp against his skin, but it did nothing to calm the storm raging in his chest. Back at the front desk, the receptionist asked if everything was okay. Henry didn't answer. He couldn't answer. His mind was spinning. The truth, the one he hadn't expected, was starting to break through. And Henry wasn't sure how he could live with it. Days passed, but Henry couldn't shake the image of his father's warmth, his father's smile. The boy's words repeated in his head, a relentless echo. Room 407. It was the kind of thing he couldn't forget, no matter how hard he tried. He buried himself in work, telling himself it could wait. He had meetings to attend, business deals to close. But the more he tried to push it away, the more it gnawed at him. By the third day, he couldn't stand it anymore. He had to go back. He didn't call ahead this time. He just showed up, driven by a force he didn't fully understand. He walked into the retirement home, nodded curtly at the front desk, and made his way straight to room 407. He knocked once, hard, before opening the door without waiting for a response. Walter looked up from a crossword puzzle, surprised but not angry. "Patrick," Walter said, his voice a little hoarse but not displeased. "Didn't expect you back so soon." "I need to talk to you," Patrick said, his voice tight, almost raw. Walter's expression faltered, just for a moment before he nodded. He set aside the puzzle and looked up at his son. "All right, come in." Patrick stepped into the room, shutting the door behind him. He crossed his arms tightly over his chest, trying to hold it all together. "I saw her," he said, his voice hard but steady. "The woman, Claire, and the boy, Malik. They were here in your room. You called her Dad, and you hugged the boy like he was your own." Walter's face shifted, a flicker of emotion passing across it, but he said nothing. Patrick pressed on. "How long has this been going on, Dad? How long have you been hiding this?" Walter leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple slowly as if the weight of the question was physically painful. "A long time," he said quietly. "Did you keep her from us? From me, Alice, and Jake?" Patrick asked, his voice cracking slightly. "Why? Why would you do that?" Walter looked at his son, his expression hardening with a quiet sorrow. "Because I thought it would ruin everything. What little I had left. You, Alice, Jake. I was barely holding it together." Patrick stood there, stunned, unsure of what to say next. How could his father have kept such a huge secret? How could he have shut out his own daughter for all these years? "I didn't know how to raise you three on my own," Walter continued, his voice softer now, tinged with regret. "I didn't have it in me. But with Claire it was different. She reminded me of your mother. Her smile, her sense of humor. It was easier to be with her." Patrick felt a sharp pang of anger, but he held it back. "You didn't let us see that version of you. Not once." Walter's shoulders sagged, and he closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with a kind of quiet resignation. "I didn't know how to be a father to you when your mother passed," he said. "But with Claire, I didn't have to pretend." Patrick stared at him, disbelief filling his chest. He had spent his entire life trying to understand his father, trying to win his approval, but all the while, his father had been holding on to another family, another life. It was too much to process. And yet, as the truth came pouring out, something inside Henry shifted. He knew this wouldn't be easy. The truth never was. But it was time to face it. As time passed, the story of Patrick, Malik, and Walter unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. Patrick, who had once lived a life of solitude in his towering office, now found himself at the center of something far more meaningful. The challenges of raising Malik, the boy who had suddenly become his son, tested him in ways he hadn't imagined. But through the mess of adjusting to parenthood, through the moments of frustration and exhaustion, something deep and profound began to take root, something that would change his life forever. Patrick's bond with Malik grew stronger every day. He began to realize that this was more than just about raising a child. It was about healing old wounds, about finding love where it had once been hidden. The house, once an impersonal space filled with cold furniture and busy schedules, now echoed with laughter. It wasn't perfect. There were days of uncertainty, nights where questions were asked that Patrick had no answers to. But there was a warmth now, a quiet sense of peace that had never been there before. One morning, as they sat together at the kitchen table, Malik asked Patrick a question that seemed simple, but was loaded with everything that had come before. "Do you think Mom can see us now?" Malik asked, his eyes wide, searching for an answer Patrick wasn't sure he had. Patrick looked down at the boy, his heart swelling with emotions that were still new, still raw. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched the boy, his son now, his entire world in the way he saw things. "I think she sees everything," Patrick said softly, his voice thick with the weight of his newfound understanding. And just like that, Patrick realized that this was his family now. This boy, this moment. And no matter what had come before, this was where he was meant to be. Weeks later, things began to settle in a way that felt right. The quiet, steady rhythm of family life became familiar. Patrick stopped counting the days until the next business meeting. He started marking time by school pickups, bedtime stories, and soccer games. It wasn't the life he had imagined, but it was everything he had always needed, though he hadn't known it until it was right in front of him.